our program for the day. And we did have some possibilities of guests coming in to speak about literacy, and just because of scheduling conflicts, it didn't work out. But then Mel and I discussed this, and we said, hey, literacy is my specialty. Why not present together? And Mel is in close contact with Debbie Navarro, who's a friend of the club, who also gives us those books that we donate when we have guest speakers on their behalf. So we said we can do it. We're going to do a presentation on literacy, and this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because I am an educator, and I know we have a few educators in our club, and our very own guest is a third grade teacher, so I'm going to ask her to chime in whenever she feels like adding any pertinent information. But my piece is going to be to introduce the importance of literacy to you, as well as share some research and strategies that we use in teaching children how to read. And I wanted to start with a definition of literacy by UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And they say literacy is the ability to identify, understand, interpret, create, communicate, and compute using printed and written materials associated with varying contexts. Literacy involves a continuum of learning to enable an individual to achieve his or her goals, to develop his or her knowledge and potential, and to participate fully in the wider society. And I thought it would be interesting to share, should I stay over here? It would be interesting to share some statistics about literacy that give us an idea of how important it is. So according to the U.S. Department of Education, 43% of adults in the U.S. read at or below a basic reading level. That's quite a high statistic. That's according to the census, the last census. 43% read at or below. That's quite a few. A basic reading level. Another interesting statistic, 30 million people over age 16 don't read well enough to understand a newspaper, a story written at the 8th grade level, or to fill out a job application. That's 30 million people over the age of 16. Also interesting to note that the U.S. ranks 5th in adult literacy skills compared to other industrialized nations. And adults with high school diplomas earn 42% less than graduates from high school. So that's a sad commentary too. Low literacy can be connected to almost every socioeconomic issue in the U.S. It links folks to public assistance, teen mothers, children living in poverty, prison populations, non-productivity in the workforce, crime, and loss of tax revenue due to unemployment. So that's just to give you an idea of how important literacy is. The greatest predictor of a child's success in school is, guess what? What's the predictor? Does anyone know?
Their reading level?
Reading level of whom?
The parent.
The mother.
Mother.
Specifically
Ooh,
the mother.
interesting. Okay, I guess that part.
That's the greatest predictor of a child's success in reading, the reading level at school. So what is it like for a non-reader? What would it be like? Can you imagine it? You go to the store, you're shopping, and you're looking at the packages, and you might not be able to read what the contents are. So for example, if an illiterate person looks at a Crisco shortening can, they might think that they're actually buying a can of fried chicken if they can't read what's in it. That's just to give you an example of what it's like. Also, if you can't read the instruction on a bottle of medication, you may be embarrassed to tell the pharmacist. You can run the risk of giving your child an overdose of the medication. You can't read road maps or signs on the street. You can't fill out a job application. You can't understand the instructions on operating, say, heavy equipment or machinery. You can't help your child with their homework. And maybe you're too embarrassed to admit that to the teacher because you can't read the notes that are sent home either. And you can't even enjoy a simple book and snuggle up, you know, on a rainy day and read a nice book for pleasure at bedtime or any time. You also may be a non-reader because you have a learning disability or dyslexia. You're not able to decode properly and you don't know it if you're an illiterate adult. Basically, they feel like outcasts and failures when they're not able to hide, and when they're not able to read, and they hide the fact that they can't. So, as an adult, it's often very difficult to ask for help and to accept help if you can't read. And so it's very challenging to organize your daily life, and also sometimes if they do get help and go to the library, they stop going for tutoring because they're just too embarrassed. But everyone who speaks can learn how to read, because guess what? That's where it starts. Now we've done a lot of research on literacy, and I'm going to share with you some of the research that we know and what some of the strategies we use in schools to teach children how to read. And as I said, it doesn't start later on in life. It starts as early as in the womb, when you're talking to the baby while they're not born yet. When they hear sounds outside of their environment, that's the beginning of language. And language is what leads to literacy, because it begins when the parents read to their children, look at picture books, they take them to the library, they encourage them to read, and the research is really clear. Parents who are poor readers and don't read to their children, often the children don't do well in school either. They're not prepared to compete with their peers. And the research tells us that there are 5 pillars to become successful readers. And I'm going to share those 5 pillars with you by showing you a demonstration of what we do in schools. And I know this will look familiar to Danielle because she's a 3rd grade teacher. And just so you know, by 3rd grade, if you are unable to read, that is also an indicator of being unsuccessful in school and in life in general. You are at risk of dropping out of high school. So reading is really, really critical and important in our society. And what we start in elementary school, is as early as preschool and kindergarten up to 3rd grade, is to work on phonemic awareness. And phonemic awareness means the ability to hear, identify, and manipulate individual sounds in spoken words. So for example, if I show you this word, I'm going to ask you, there are various different strategies for raising your phonemic awareness. So if I ask you, what is the first sound in bus? B. Right. So you just isolated a phoneme. What's the first sound in cup? In the word cup, what's the first sound? Right. You just isolated a phoneme. Another strategy is, what sound do you see in these 3 words? What sound is the same? Again, B. So what you just did is you identified a phoneme. You identified that bus, big, and bun start with the same B. So we have lots of fancy words for teaching reading, but it's really very simple. Another strategy is, I'll show you 3 other words. We have seen bus, bun, and rug. Which word does it belong?
Rug.
Rug. Why is that, Nancy?
It has the first sound is different.
You heard the first sound, bus, bun, and rug. That is the odd man out. Rug starts with a R. So what you just did was you categorized phonemes. So we do phoneme categorization. Then, if you see the word, this word, and how many sounds are in the word big?
3.
Right. The first sound is
B.
B. Next sound is I, and the last sound is
G.
G. This is the beginning of reading. B, I, G. What you just did is you segmented phonemes, phoneme segmentation. And the same thing goes the other way, where you can blend phonemes and put them together. Either separate them apart and tell me what each one is and isolate them, or you can segment them, or you can blend them. And that's the beginning of decoding, blending them and being able to read words. Finally, this word, if I show you this word, you can all read this word. This word is?
Smile.
Smile. And then now I'm going to cover up the first sound, and that gives me a new word.
Mile.
Mile. So now you're taking off the first sound, and that's called phoneme deletion. And the same goes for adding a phoneme. This word is park, and if I put the sound s in front of park, spark, right? So now you're learning how to read. And these are the strategies that we use with our children in elementary school, usually up to grade 2. By grade 2, you should really be reading already. And 3 is kind of practicing and making it more fluent. The next part, okay, so I just talked about the phonemic awareness, which is one of the pillars, and the other pillars I'll discuss and not go as deeply into them as I did with phonemic awareness. Phonics, and that's the relationship between the written letter and the sound. So when you see the letter B, you know that it sounds like B. And then phonics is difficult in English because it's unreliable and unpredictable, which is why people who learn English have a hard time spelling. Even if you learn English as a native, you have a hard time spelling because it's inconsistent. If you look at Spanish with all the letters, the phonemes that they have, all the vowels are a, e, I, o, u, they are always pronounced that way. And every consonant in Spanish is always pronounced the same way. And so therefore, it's predictable. There's never an exception to that rule, and you will be able to read much more easily. The same thing in Japanese. It's very reliable. But in English, we have, just to demonstrate how difficult it is, I want you to look at this word and tell me what it says. Can you see it?
Gotti.
Gotti, okay. Gotti, it's spelled G-H-O-T-I. It may not look familiar to you, and that's just to demonstrate to you how difficult the phonic system is in English. Literacy experts know that this word spells fish, and I'll tell you why. Where do you see G-H in some words that sound like f, where G-H sounds like f?
Laugh.
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 Another word, enough. Cough, tough. G-H oftentimes spells the sound f in English. And so G-H here stands for f. And O, what about in the word women? W-O-M-E-N. How odd is it that the letter O makes the sound I? And then T-I, many of our words that end in T-I-O-N, nation, carnation, situation, the T-I is a sh. So that is to demonstrate to you how difficult it is, the phonics system in English. So Gotti is really fish. The F, G-H, the O is I in women, and the T-I from nation, and all of those other words. So does that make sense? That's just a little demo to show you how difficult it is to spell. So it doesn't mean, it's not really a measurement of your intelligence if you're not a good speller. It's really how good is your memory. Another pillar, other than, so we looked at phonemic awareness, we looked at phonics, and now we're going to talk a little bit about fluency. That's the next level. We want children to be able to read their text accurately and quickly and develop what we call in literacy automaticity, to be able to automatically read. Because guess what? While you're in the phonemic awareness and the phonic stage, your brain is tending to sounds and individual sounds and letters. but we want to get past that. We want to be able to read vocabulary words and sentences fluently and develop automaticity. So if you look on the back of your agenda, there's just a fun little paragraph that looks like gobbledygook, but I bet you if you tried to read it, you'll prove to yourself that you have already developed automaticity. The brain is already automatically in tune to reading fluently because you're familiar with phonics and phonemic awareness. So go ahead and take a moment to read it. Tell me if you can read it. So it shows that as long as you have that initial letter and everything else is mixed up, there was a study that showed it came, yes.
I have a question. At what age level would this be very hard? I'll ask the
Ask our third grade teacher. That's
3-year-old teacher. Would a third grade? Would a third grade be able to read this, or would they have difficulty? I'm just curious.
They'd probably be able to read it if they're in my classroom.
There you go.
I work a lot with how language works and how funny it can be.
And you.
So if they learn the tricks and they learn to make meaning, it's shocking to them what they're able to do. And so when children tell me that they're not good readers and they start to get like 20 words a minute when they should already be at 80, I say, don't worry, by the end of the year you're going to get 100. We're all going to celebrate together. It just takes some time.
And teachers have to not be afraid of phonics and phonemic awareness and vocabulary and fluency. They have to really be comfortable with the terminology and the strategies that we use to teach reading. It's really very basic, and kids love it. We can play with it. They have fun with it. Yes, David.
One of the more interesting things is that the state actually uses third grade reading levels to determine how many prisons we need.
Prisons.
Yes, Joanne.
I think it's interesting what you were talking about, the sounding out. My granddaughter's in kindergarten, and she's just recently getting really, really interested in sounding everything out. You know, with the letter sounds, and she looks at a word and she'll say, and you know, R, 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 or P, P, and she'll sound it out.
How old is your granddaughter?
5.5.
Perfect time, yes.
She shouldn't be reading sentences yet.
As just identifying at the phonemic awareness and the phonic stage, yes, right
As
there.
we've moved into the Common Core state standards, what they used to do in kindergarten by this point of the year seemed to be farther along. Now they're taking more time to break down those sound patterns. So some parents were worried, but what they need to realize is that the foundational skills now will have had more time to mature. Especially since some children don't really truly learn to read for developmental reasons, and it doesn't mean they're low, by the end of 2nd grade. So when everyone was pushing all this stuff in kindergarten, it was like, but wait, some kids naturally come to it by the end of 1st grade. So
She's doing fine, yeah. The next level for her would be that this next pillar is vocabulary. Working on developing, amplifying her vocabulary and exposing her to different environments and going to the museum, going to the beach, going to, and pointing out words and telling her stories and then just increasing her vocabulary. That's another predictor of success, academic success in school. And that's how we communicate effectively is with our vocabulary. And finally, comprehension. This is probably the hardest part in the end, is to comprehend what you're reading. Because you know how some boys who have their bar mitzvah, they read all of this text in the Bible or from wherever, and then they don't really understand what they're saying. That's lack of comprehension. And you could be reading, maybe some of our newscasters are that way. They're in automatic mode and they really don't know what they're saying because they're not paying attention. They just know their job really well and they're able to read cue cards and they're not really tuning in or understanding what they're reading. They don't have to. They're just delivering the information. But what we want is to develop that comprehension when we read, and that's when we can enjoy reading. And we have to have a purpose, either to get information from the text, to do research, to enjoy it, and that's the way we communicate, not just in oral language, but with the printed word. So that was the last pillar. So you had phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And those are the 5 pillars. If you can establish that early on, by 3rd grade, then you're good to go in school and you'll have success and you'll enjoy learning.
One more thing that I think
Yes.
is significant is that research states that 85% of an adult's vocabulary is solidified by the end of 5th grade. I mean, you know, if you think about it, 85%, the rest could be more technical terms depending on what your career ends up being. But what we're really trying to push in elementary, and especially in the lower grades, pre-K, K1, is that all that vocabulary, your kid doesn't need to be able to spell it yet. But if you play with words and you have them describe lamps, you know, the brick wall, textures, all of that, you're opening their world so when they arrive at that word on a piece of paper, they're more likely to remember because they have that personal connection. That is huge.
It is. Thank you, Daniel. And so that leads us to our next part, which has to do with the DOT project. And Mel is going to lead us in that discussion. Thank you, everyone.
That's what literacy is about. That's why literacy is important. That's an understanding of what it means, both at the adult level and at the children's level, getting there. Now we morph back into who we are, which is a Rotary Club. What are we going to do about it? How can we possibly help? How can we help with children? How can we inspire a love of reading? We already go into schools in different levels. For example, within Rotary there is Interact, which is high school aged, service club, Rotary, sponsored. We have our project we talked about earlier, the International Mother Language Day project, where we go to the older 5th and 6th grade elementary level kids. Here's a possibility for something for the younger kids. I did speak to Debbie Navarro. She's a friend of our club. She runs the Los Angeles chapter of an organization called Reach Out and Read. This is an organization that provides books, children's books, to medical clinics and facilities all over the world, certainly all over Los Angeles area in her case, so that children at their most vulnerable will be able to read or have their parents read to them in the waiting room and combine the nerves they have about being at the doctor, but fill the time with something happy and a love of reading. So when we have our external guest speakers or our video guest speakers, we will donate a book in that person's name with a little label on the back to Reach Out and Read to go to these clinics. That's one of our ways of helping. For the 2nd, 3rd-ish grade level, there is this wonderful project that Debbie suggested to me. We'd hoped that she'd be able to come here today, but it is her uncle's 70th birthday, and it was lunch, and my attempt to convince the uncle, who I've never met, to move it to dinner didn't work. There's a wonderful book called The Dot by a fellow named Peter H. Reynolds. And Debbie has read this book to Rotary clubs for the purpose of inspiring them to take this project and go to schools in the area, to the younger children, and teach them a couple of things, not just the love of reading by reading a book to or with them, but also what this book tries to do, which is to inspire individuality, to inspire creativity, to inspire empowerment, that you're okay with who you are. So what Debbie suggested that we do is that I'm going to read the book to you now, and while we're doing this, let's think about what can we do in schools. Now remember, a dot can be just a dot, but a dot also is somewhat universal. What that means is that a dot is the same in English as it is in Portuguese. It may have a different name. It's the same that it would be in Russian. It may have a different name. It may be called something different. So not only do we have the opportunity as a Rotary Club to go into local schools and perhaps use this to inspire and empower children, but we also have the opportunity to take this out as more of an international project and see if we can get other Rotary clubs to want to play with us while we do this. So first, let me share with you the story of The Dot. Art class was over, but Vashti sat glued to her chair. Her paper was empty. Vashti's teacher leaned over the blank paper. "Ah, a polar bear in a snowstorm," she said. "Very funny," said Vashti. "I just can't draw." Her teacher smiled. Just make a mark and see where it takes you. Vashti grabbed a marker and gave the paper a good strong jab. There! Her teacher picked up the paper and studied it carefully. She pushed the paper toward Vashti and quietly said, "Now, sign it." Vashti thought for a moment. Well, maybe I can't draw, but I can sign my name. The next week, when Vashti walked into art class, she was surprised to see what was hanging above her teacher's desk. It was the little dot she had drawn. Her dot, all framed in swirly gold. I can make a better dot than that. She opened her never-before-used set of watercolors and set to work. Vashti painted and painted a yellow dot, a green dot, a red dot, a blue dot. The blue mixed with the yellow, she discovered she could make a green dot. Vashti kept experimenting, lots of little dots in many colors. If I can make little dots, I can make big dots too. Vashti splashed her colors with a bigger brush on bigger paper to make bigger dots. Vashti even made a dot by not painting a dot. At the school art show a few weeks later, Vashti's many dots again made quite a splash. Vashti noticed a little boy gazing up at her. "You're a really great artist. I wish I could draw," he said. "I bet you can," said Vashti. "Me? No, not me. I can't draw a straight line with a ruler." Vashti smiled. She handed the boy a blank sheet of paper. "Show me." The boy's pencil shook as he drew his line. Vashti stared at the boy's squiggle, and then she said, "Please, sign it." That is the dot, and a story of how to empower anybody to be who you are. Now, while we begin the process together of brainstorming for just a few minutes about what we might be able to do as a club, who do we know? What schools can we go talk to? How can we use this project for people we know? My lovely assistant, Vanna White, from whom you may wish to buy a vowel now that we're learning about such things, we're going to give everyone just a couple of minutes right now to start the future of what maybe we'll decide to do someday with this club. So everybody, please share and make your mark. Make your mark on the world. Now, while we're doing this, I'll explain a little bit of background to you, and you can still see some of it on this last week's online program. There is something called the DOT Project, which focuses on something new called International Dot Day, which comes up in mid-September, when schools and children around the world are encouraged to make these dots, to make their mark on the world. Again, this is more about a dot, and it's more about artwork, more than about just artwork. It's about what can you do to be who you are. There's a video of some kids using some sort of an iPad application to make their dots. There's a compilation of photos, again, from Portugal, as it turns out, where they've celebrated this. So with the DOT project, what is it that we can do? And this has a couple of other possibilities for us, because by connecting ourselves to the already existing DOT project, if we wanted to do that worldwide, we would also be able to inject some awareness of Rotary and Rotary clubs and what we do into an existing international project. So this has a lot of possibilities, but the real point is, when we're talking about literacy during Rotary's Literacy Month, when we're talking about issues of adult literacy, when we're talking about children and needing to learn better reading skills by certain ages and how they go about doing this, the question for Rotary always becomes, what can we do to help with this? How can we do something tangible to fix a problem, if indeed there's a problem in the community? And if not here, then where? For example, although there are standardized shapes and colors and sizes, I would like the person at the intersection to know how to read the word stop, for example. So what can we be doing to help just out there in the universe? Not just, this is Literacy Month, oh boy, let's think about literacy for a few minutes, but how can we help? Because again, imagine if you, anyone other than Yoko, were dropped in the middle of Yokohama, Japan right now, and told to find the stationery store. I'm just making something random up out of the blue. Which corner? Okay. Now, Yoko could say, well, just turn left at name of street and then turn left at name of next street. Those are symbols that are completely different from what we're used to. Whereas if you dropped us in a country, if you sent us to Mexico, we use the same letters for the most part, so you might have a better sense of knowing. But imagine being dropped somewhere where the symbols themselves are completely different and what you're going to rely on. That's what it is not to be able to read. That's what it is not to know where you're going. I mean, it's one of the reasons why, I mean, the languages are different, I know, but it's one of the reasons why "Donde está el baño" is one of the most important phrases to learn if you're going to go to a Latin American country. But if you couldn't even say that for some reason, I mean, if you had to go to the bathroom with laryngitis, how are you going to find a bathroom in a foreign land? Okay, this is what it's like not to be able to read whatever the local language is. It's not about reading English. It's about empowerment anywhere else. If we could somehow work with a Rotary Club in a faraway place that speaks a different language to teach those literacy skills there, that's another advantage.